We've talked about what a job analysis is briefly, and we've kind of talked a little bit about some of the techniques that can be done to run a job analysis. And so, if you've run a job analysis, what comes out of it? Okay? So, as we showed earlier in one of the earlier presentations, the job analysis, as we say, is a framework. Without it, you cannot function in the human resources field. Okay? So everything hinges on job analysis. And we'll talk a little bit of it right now. In particular, we're going to talk about job descriptions, job evaluation in some bits of detail. But clearly, we're going to have to come back to all like training and selection and performance principles. These are going to be topics that are going to be later modules. Okay? So the job description is just simply what a job holder does, right? I mean, we've all seen job descriptions. Job specification, what are the KSAOs necessary to be successful, and perhaps most interesting, job evaluation, how much should we pay somebody, okay? So here's a job description actually that was used for my position that I have right here at this university. So the School of Arts and Sciences, we're back to that one, seeks 2 professors at the assistant or associate level to teach undergraduate experimental courses, cognitive, bio, neuroscience, general psych, and applied, drugs and behavior, abnormal counseling. Clearly I did not get the applied courses one. I got the first one, okay? So advise undergraduates, conduct research with undergraduates. You see all of the different task elements that are in there, participates in curriculum and program development, and etc. Okay? All right, so a job description is fundamentally important because, of course, one of the first questions a newly hired person is, what am I supposed to do? Well, look at your job description. And so you find a job description can help reduce role ambiguity and conflict between people because it should, if done properly, job description should say, this is what you do, this is what you do, okay? And there should be no area that is not covered, okay? Job design, I'll talk about that on the next slide. Training, yeah, of course, I mean, an effective performance in this job is you are at let's design training. We're going to talk about personnel selection. Who should we hire? Okay, so all the different aspects of the HR side all hinge in here. Okay, job design is actually an interesting kind of output of job descriptions. And it's the way to perform the series of behaviors that you should perform in order to complete the task. So in any job, some tasks are much different. You know, they're perhaps much more labor intensive, dangerous, something. Like in welding, there's a particular part during the assembly process. It is really, really time consuming, it's got some potential for danger, so you ought to design that element of the job very rigidly. When you are doing this task, you will do this, okay? Preparing neonatal feeding is perhaps a very difficult task as well. Or how about this one? This is a great, beautiful one. UPS drivers cannot make left turns into oncoming traffic. All right, at uncontrolled intersections, UPS drivers cannot make a left turn. They must find some other way to get the job done because making left turns into oncoming traffic has been associated with a very high accident rate. Okay, so they're going to precisely design the way that a UPS driver will drive their truck. Job evaluation is, again, one of the outcomes of the job analysis. And a job evaluation is going to determine the value of a job to an organization and therefore set the salaries. And so what's going to happen is you're going to try to quantify the jobs in some way. And usually you're going to use some kind of a point system. And a point system will be based on compensable factors. Okay? So compensable factors are things that you bring to the job that the organization should value. In other words, if a job requires a lot of effort, all right, that's a compensable factor. If the job requires a very specific skill, that's a compensable factor. If the job requires a great degree of responsibility, okay, that's a compensable factor. If the job is performed in extreme weather, extremely hot or extremely cold, that's a compensable factor. Okay, so the idea is you package it together, you give points to these various dimensions, okay, and here is the way that job evaluation is done at Amazon, and you can read it in more details. But some of the things, I love this. Factors that can boost an employee's score include being reactive to customer needs, acting as a mentor, providing new ideas and discussion, and exhibiting strong. I don't remember that. I can't read that. I can't read it. Long story. I can't see that. Okay, so clearly there's these compensable factors that Amazon goes with. Okay, and so once you've done this analysis, what you can then do after the job evaluation is you can lay it out and look at this graphical format. Here is a variety of jobs. Each dot represents a job, right? Each purple dot is a job. And here is the job evaluation. That is the number of points that are received from a job evaluation. And up on the left is average hourly wage. And so you can see that along this dotted line, you have perfect equity. This is what's considered to be fair, okay? But then you have situations where, look at over here, the job evaluation points are relatively low, but the compensation is high, they're overpaid. Job evaluation points are high, salary is relatively low, that's underpaid, okay? So it's kind of a neat way to visually represent the equity in your organization, okay? And so this idea of compensable factors is interesting because the way that the organization designates compensable factors might not match what workers believe should be compensable factors. So here we see one of the big trends in the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology was the Great Resignation following the COVID pandemic. So workers quit their jobs at a record pace because they felt unprotected, okay? Because many workers, especially these essential workers that were perhaps like in the grocery stores, they felt unprotected because their organization was not doing enough to keep them from harm, okay? And so there was these differences. So they quit, they quit in increased rates, and the reason was because what they felt was a compensable factor was not equal to what the organization thought was a compensable factor. So in an attempt to create this equity, right, to create equity, because as you know, there has been a gender pay gap for many years, and therefore female employees tend to be on the underpaid side, or are more likely to be on the underpaid side, and male employees are more likely to be on the overpaid side. And there is a truth to that, okay? So the Equal Pay Act of 1963 was an early attempt to try to shrink the wage gap. And it says men and women who do equal work should receive equal pay. But equal is really not as simple as it sounds, okay? So even within the same job, you can have two people with the same job. Are they equal? That's hard. Well, here's the thing, is women are paid quite a bit less. On average, in 2022 anyway, the wage gap was about $10,000 between men and women in the United States. In Texas, it was slightly worse than the U.S. overall, okay? So the doctrine of comparable worth is the idea that if a job has equal value or worth to an organization, it should be compensated equally. And this is problematic in that many people argue that female-typed jobs are paid less than male-typed jobs, and there's a truth to this. And we're going to come back to this repeatedly, but we're going to find that, unfortunately, when it comes to, say, job performance, this is flashing forward quite a bit, but when it comes to things like job performance, the organization usually rewards or recognizes effective job performance in terms of visual products, things that can be seen. And this is something that males tend to be better at, is bragging about what they've accomplished. Females, on the other hand, are often likely to show good job performance by, say, helping a colleague. Okay, but helping a colleague does not lead to, something that you can produce and show to your boss. And so often the work of female employees gets undervalued because it gets unrecognized because of the way the system is in place. Okay? All right, so there we have job analysis. So now that we have that, we can start to move forward into the selection, closer towards the selection process. We're not to the selection process yet, but we're getting there.